Okay, so today we're diving into a case, and honestly, is one of the most disturbing things I've ever read. Like, seriously, it's going to be rough, folks. We're talking about the Mazan rape case.
Yeah, and it's everywhere in the news, but the headlines just don't do it justice. It's the kind of story that sticks with you.
It really does. I mean, the basic facts are bad enough. We're talking about this guy, Dominique Pellico.
And right from the jump, the case is about how this seemingly normal guy
Totally, just your average dude.
could orchestrate something so horrific.
He drugged his wife, Giselle, for over a decade, 10 years, so that he could allow at least 51 men to rape her.
And he filmed it all, every single encounter.
I mean, 51 men. Over a decade. It just boggles the mind. It's hard to even process.
What makes it really hit home is that this wasn't some random act of violence in a dark alley. This happened in their home, a place that's supposed to be safe.
It just chills you to the bone to think about it. And poor Giselle, she's in her 70s now, and she had absolutely no idea what was happening for a full decade. Can you imagine? Just waking up one day and the police are at your door and your entire life is turned upside down.
The psychological trauma is unimaginable. Yet she's demanding a public trial. She's saying she wants the shame to change sides.
That's incredibly brave. It would be understandable if she wanted to hide from the world. But she's using her voice, demanding justice for herself and every other victim of this kind of horrific abuse.
Absolutely, and her resilience is what makes this case bigger than just the awful details. Giselle's giving a voice to a much larger conversation about rape culture. It's forcing people to confront this really uncomfortable truth.
It really is. Now let's dig a little deeper into this Dominique Pellico, the guy at the center of this whole thing. He was actually already on the police radar for sexual offenses in '99 and 2010.
Yeah, and that's what's so troubling. Like, what if those earlier incidents, one with a young real estate agent back in '99, and then later in 2010 when he was caught filming up women's skirts, what if they hadn't been treated as isolated incidents?
You have to wonder, could this decade of abuse been prevented? It's just heartbreaking.
It really makes you think about how we view those early warning signs, those red flags. What if we treated them like indicators of something much larger, a pattern?
It really underscores how crucial vigilance and proactive measures are in these cases. But let's talk about the 51 other men involved in this. The details about who they are disturbing in a whole other way.
It really throws you for a loop. You might expect some stereotypical criminal profile.
Right.
That's not what we see here at all. We're talking about men from all walks of life. Ages 26 to 73, a firefighter, a prison guard, even a journalist. It really shatters this dangerous idea that there's a type when it comes to these kinds of horrific acts.
It's a harsh wake-up call. This could be anyone, someone you know, someone you work with.
Yeah.
And as if the rapes weren't horrifying enough, the investigation found another layer, even more disturbing. Some of these guys had child pornography.
Yeah, it's like this whole other level of depravity, It makes you question everything, doesn't it?
For sure. It makes you question who you can trust, who's living next door to you.
Yeah.
And the way these crimes were carried out, it was calculated, almost methodical.
It's bone-chilling. Pellico sought these men out, targeted them online. He used this online forum, and he would say, "A son Sue," which translates to, without her knowing. He was literally advertising his wife.
It was sickening. He even gave these guys specific instructions. No strong colognes or aftershave. Come in quietly. Warm up your hands so you don't wake her.
It's beyond disturbing.
And the worst part is, after each assault, he'd clean Giselle up like he was trying to erase the evidence, maintain this facade of a normal life.
Right. Like it was all just a normal day.
It's truly terrifying. And the fact that this went on for years, completely undetected, it's a terrifying thought. It's like something out of a nightmare, isn't it? This whole idea that this could be happening right next door and no one would even know.
It's a harsh reality. But thankfully, in this case, the truth did come out, and now the legal system is trying to grapple with the enormity of it. The trial itself started last month, September 2024, and it's set to go on until December.
Yeah, and it's already causing a huge stir. It's a landmark case, no question. There's so much debate about the evidence alone. I mean, we're talking about photos, videos, incredibly graphic stuff that Pellico recorded. It brings up a lot of questions about what's appropriate to show in court.
Right. It's a tough one. On the one hand, you have the jury. How will this kind of disturbing material impact their judgment? And then on the other, there's this need for transparency, for justice to be served openly.
And the judge's decision to ban the press and the public from seeing the evidence,
Yeah.
and even from attending some parts of the trial, it sparked outrage. Some people are even calling it a cover-up, saying it protects the perpetrators more than the victim.
It's definitely a controversial move. And it kind of goes against what Giselle herself wants. I mean, she asked for a public trial. She wants the world to see what happened, to understand the full horror of what she went through.
It speaks volumes about her strength. But it also makes you realize that this case is so much bigger than just one woman's story. It's shining a light on this much larger issue of rape culture, these ingrained societal norms that allow this kind of horror to happen in the first place.
Absolutely. We throw around the term rape culture a lot, but this case really brings it home. It's not just about individual acts of violence. It's about the underlying attitudes and beliefs that make those acts possible, that create an environment where this can happen.
So how do we even begin to tackle something so deeply rooted? I mean, it feels like an insurmountable problem sometimes.
Well, I think it starts with awareness, with acknowledging the problem and calling it out wherever we see it. But beyond that, we need systemic change. We need to reform our legal systems, challenge those deep-seated gender stereotypes, and create a culture where consent isn't just a concept, it's a lived reality.
It's about fundamentally changing how we think about these issues. And looking at France right now, it seems like Giselle's courage, her willingness to come forward has struck a nerve. There are protests, demonstrations. There's this groundswell of support for victims of sexual violence. It feels different.
I think you're right. It feels like there's a shift happening, a collective refusal to accept the status quo any longer. People are demanding accountability, and they're demanding change.
There's this one image that's really stayed with me. It's a mural of Giselle, painted by a street artist. It says, "For shame to change sides." It's powerful, right?
It's really resonating.
Like this visual representation of shifting the blame, putting it where it belongs, on the perpetrators and the systems that enable them.
It's taking back the power.
Exactly.
What's striking about this case is that it's not just a French story, it's become a global one. It's on the BBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post. It feels like everyone's talking about it. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because deep down we all recognize that this could happen anywhere. Rape culture and misogyny, they aren't confined to any one country or culture. They're global issues.
You hit the nail on the head. It's a human problem.
It's heavy stuff. I mean, it's easy to want to just shut it out,
Yeah.
pretend it's not happening. But honestly, I think that's the worst thing we can do. This case, it's like you said, it's a global conversation now, and we need to use that momentum to actually make a difference.
I completely agree. It's like this case has blown the lid off of how we protect the vulnerable, and how we hold abusers accountable. We have to do better.
We really do. And it starts with changing the narrative, right? Instead of silence and shame, we need to create a culture that actually supports survivors, believes them.
It's about giving them a voice instead of silencing them.
Exactly. But how do we actually do that? Where do we even begin?
It's a huge challenge, for sure. Education's a big part of it, obviously. We need to be teaching young people about consent, healthy relationships, setting boundaries. But we also can't ignore the bigger picture stuff. The legal loopholes, the societal norms that protect abusers and silence victims. We have to address that too.
It sounds daunting, but it's also more urgent than ever, wouldn't you say? This case really brings it home how real these issues are.
100%. And it's on all of us. We can't just sit back and wait for someone else to fix it.
So what can we do? I mean, as individuals?
It's the little things, really. Call out those uncomfortable jokes. Speak up when you see harmful stereotypes being thrown around. Support organizations that are fighting for change. It all adds up.
We can't allow ourselves to become numb to it.
Exactly.
Because as difficult as these conversations are, they're absolutely crucial.
And remember, change doesn't happen overnight, right? It's going to be messy. There are going to be setbacks, pushback. But we can't give up. We have to keep pushing for a world that's more just, more equitable.
Well said. This case, as horrifying as it is, reminds us that we have a long way to go. But it also shows that people are angry. They're demanding change. And that's where hope lies. Okay, folks, that brings us to the end of this deep dive.